Chapter 13. Imogen whistled to herself as she prepared the horse's feed the next evening. She was still floating, her head in the clouds, as she remembered their incredibly romantic date. Honestly, she'd gone to bed dreaming of Gabe, wishing it were him instead of Cookie snoring next to her. She laughed at the memory of waking up to her dog stealing the covers. Her sudden noise caused Rowdy's ears to flick toward her in interest. Unlike her own horse, Gabe's horses were the steady type. It might take an actual bomb to set them off. Fortune, for his part, paced up and down the fence line, periodically calling out to her anxiously. He'd continued to be on edge today, and she wasn't sure what had sparked it. For the last few weeks, he'd seemed content enough to live outside, but she had started to see signs of the same restlessness she hadn't seen since he was stalled at Smithfield's show stables. Maybe he just needed to burn some energy off. She made a mental reminder to talk to Gabe and Bailey about what she could do despite the winter. She wanted to make sure he was settled and happy. The fencing was high, and the top had an electric current as an added incentive to stay within, but Imogen knew Fortune was a highly athletic and intelligent horse. If he wanted to escape and run away, he was going to find a way out, period. She handed out the feed and started on the other chores, finding her rhythm easily. If her friends in New Jersey could see her now, they'd barely recognize her. Truthfully, Imogen had been putting off a trip back home for longer than she should have. It was time to go close the door on her old life. Imogen took her time completing the chores, waiting for Gabe to get home. The animals had to be fed and the pastures mucked out. They had discussed a trip back to her apartment to pack her things, but she decided this morning she would make it a priority. She hated to leave, especially now with his guest and their fight, but she couldn't keep living out of a suitcase forever. Besides, she wanted to make sure everything was settled nicely once Gabe's guest left. That's where Gabe found her when he got home. He saw her in the driveway and immediately sought her out in the paddocks before going inside. He watched her shuffle around the paddock, lost in her own world as she talked to the horses like they could understand a single word she was saying. It was adorable. Finally, he coughed to get her attention, not wanting to startle her. She turned around and greeted him with a huge smile. Considering she was covered head to toe in insulated gear, with her wool cap pulled down so low he couldn't make out her eyes, he barely recognized her. Her nose was pink from the chill, and she looked like a child dressed to play in the snow from far away. Looking at her now, one would think she was more Frosty than Abominable Snowman when it came to attitude. "Hey there, handsome." "Hey there yourself. Almost done?" "I am, in fact. I'm getting pretty good at this farmhand thing." She was really proud of herself, and punctuated her words with a sassy hip check and posed with the shovel like a model. Gabe laughed. "Want to take a break and come have a cup of tea inside?" She pretended to think, finger on her lips. "Does this tea involve a cake or muffin of any kind?" Clearly, she'd been talking to his sister. "You talked to Harper?" He growled, miffed that his surprise was ruined. "Maybe," she answered coyly. "Come on, handsome, you need to feed this beast. Plus, I'm freezing." She skipped her way to the gate, dragging the shovel behind her, the sound scraping on the hard ground. "I know how to warm my girl up." When she closed the gate, he lunged for her, ready to tickle, but she ran squealing to the porch. Just as she reached the top, he caught her, his stride much longer than hers, and grabbed her in a bear hug, spinning her around as she laughed wildly. That's how Anita found them, as she opened the door at the noise and surveyed the two laughing like lunatics. When Imogen caught sight of her, she stilled. "Gabe, put me down." He relinquished his hold, letting her slide down his body. She'd forgotten for a minute that he had a visitor. "Oh, hey, Anita." "Hello, Imogen. How are you?" "I'm good, thanks for asking." That wasn't so bad. Definitely more words between them than they'd had in the past anyway. An improvement at least, even if it was strangely polite. Gabe held Imogen against his body, unwilling to let her go, as Anita turned to go back inside the house. Imogen adjusted her coveralls and grinned up at him, turning in his arms. He tipped down her wool cap flirtatiously. She stuck her tongue out at him and pushed away, following Anita into the warmth, hips shaking flirtatiously. Gabe chuckled, following her inside. No matter how many times Imogen walked into Gabe's home, she was struck by its rustic warmth. It just felt like a home. Despite being a bachelor, Gabe had exquisite taste and an eye for detail. The walls were a warm wood with high ceilings and a loft above the living room, which was attached to the open kitchen. Anita resumed her seat at the kitchen island, hunched over a computer, searching up something. Imogen had no idea what it was because Anita angled the screen away. She had a lot of questions about the woman and what she was doing here. And even if she was in Imogen's usual seat, well, she didn't need to say anything. She could sit anywhere. She wasn't 12 years old. Imogen decided that maybe it was time to try a little harder with the woman. Imogen didn't like the jealousy she was feeling. Gabe was clearly not interested in her. Maybe it would help to get to know each other a little bit. "Hey, Anita, I was wondering, what do you do for work?" "I'm a Marine." Anita's attention never left her computer. "Oh." Okay, Imogen thought. Was it some kind of requirement in the military to be so close-lipped? How did they get anything done? Gabe walked into the house, taking off his parka, and interjected. "Lopez is still on active duty between tours. She's on leave for a short time." "Oh," Imogen said again. That made sense. "That's really cool. You must love to travel." Anita grunted, neither agreeing nor denying. What did that mean? Imogen wasn't sure how to read her. Gabe broke the silence. "I'll start the water for tea, then I'm going to get changed." "Sounds perfect," Imogen responded, still watching Anita. This was the first time they'd been in the house together, and it seemed silly not to get to know her a little. "So, Anita, where are you from?" "Boston." Cool, Imogen thought. Interrogation was not her thing. Deciding to leave her alone, as she clearly preferred, Imogen took down 3 mugs from the cabinet, placing them on the counter, and opened the tea drawer. Decisions, she thought, then finally opting for a cherry blend for herself and a lemon-lavender blend for Gabe. He needed some calming. She covertly inspected the woman sitting at the counter. She didn't strike her as a tea drinker, but it would be rude not to ask. "Anita, would you like a cup of tea?" "Nah, I'm good. Thanks, though." Well, that was practically verbose, thought Imogen smugly. She'd crack her sooner rather than later. They might not have much in common, but they both seemed to respect Gabe. The man in question came back into the room, freshly changed into a long-sleeved black tee and gray sweatpants. He looked happy and relaxed, and very, very handsome. Gabe wordlessly helped Imogen to complete the tea ritual, pouring the water and steeping it. He smiled when he smelled his blend and the mug she'd given him. It had a picture of an abominable snowman on it and read, "My spirit animal." "Taking care of me, Jersey?" He leaned over and gave her a soft kiss. "Always," she whispered onto his lips, smiling softly. Anita grunted at their flirting. "You guys are so sweet, I'm going to get a canker sore." "Charming," Gabe shot back, clearly annoyed. He shouldn't be made to feel awkward in his own kitchen. They left Anita to her relative privacy and brought their drinks into the sunken living room, where they curled up in front of the fire, Imogen's feet in his lap. He rubbed one of her feet, wrapped in a fluffy sock, and she groaned in pleasure. She'd missed this time with him terribly. After a few minutes of sipping in silence, she jumped. "Oh my goodness, I completely forgot to tell you about my meeting with the lawyer." He put down his mug and turned toward her. "You had the meeting?" She nodded emphatically. "So?" he prompted her. "Does this mean you'll finally tell me your plan?" "Yes." She'd been keeping it a secret because she wanted to be sure of the details first. When she first came up with the idea, she thought it was genius, but the more she thought about it, the more Imogen realized she had to get it right, or it wouldn't be feasible. Running a nonprofit like she planned was going to be extremely difficult, both emotionally and physically. "I'm starting an equine sanctuary." He didn't expect that. Blinking, he asked, "An equine sanctuary?" "Exactly." "What brought this on?" Then Gabe thought for a moment. "Fortune?" Imogen nodded. "Yes. Honestly, Fortune inspired the idea, and when I went to the rescue to try and adopt him, I saw all the horses there waiting for their forever homes. It broke my heart. How many horses don't have a soft landing? If you weren't there, Fortune may have ended up euthanized or in a terrible home." "You can't help them all, Imogen." He loved her big heart, but an undertaking like that would require a lot of work, not to mention money. I'm aware, Gabe. I've put together a 40-page business plan, done my due diligence, and spoken at length with the Green Meadow Equine Rescue and Bailey on running a large equine farm, and with Joe about what is required for the land. My lawyer has helped me start a nonprofit foundation and open a bank account. It's all in the works. Gabe was impressed. She'd obviously been putting a lot of research and effort into this over the last few months. He had no doubt that with her organizational skills and tenacity, she'd accomplish what she'd intended. Still, it would be an uphill battle. They spent the next 30 minutes discussing her plans, with him asking questions periodically. The one area he was getting stuck was the land. He had to ask the biggest question. Where are you going to put it? She would need at least 5 acres, probably 10 to be safe. I don't think you should be looking for an apartment, even temporarily. If you are going to lease or buy land, you will probably need to live on the property. I've already thought of that, she said smugly. Joe has been adamant I stay with her, but I'm keeping my options open so I can get some privacy. But my priority is the land. I'm looking for 10 to 20 acres, nothing too large to manage. It will be less expensive without a house on the property. I can rent an apartment nearby and focus on drainage, fencing, and shelter for the animals, and then eventually build a home on site when it's up and running. Wow, for someone who professes to be spontaneous, you've really planned this out. Gabe was relieved that she did want to lay down roots here, and said as much. Imogen smacked his arm playfully. I wasn't lying to you. But as much as I don't want to leave, I have to go back to New Jersey soon. He stilled. You're going back? She knew why he was wary. No matter how much she promised, he still thought she had one foot out the door. It wasn't fair to either of them, but she always followed through. He'd learned that about her. Only for a few days. I need to sublet my apartment and pack up my things. Tie up loose ends, you know? He did know. He still didn't want her to leave, even though he knew it was something that had to be done. He simply nodded. When are you going to do that? Maybe he could go with her. He'd never been to New Jersey. It might be fun. He'd love to see where she grew up. Probably tomorrow, actually, she admitted. It's just a quick trip, and I'll be back in a few days to help with the horses again. She decided it would be better if she ripped off the Band-Aid and made it happen. She'd put it off long enough, and while Gabe had his guest, it might be the best time. She clearly wasn't leaving yet, and Imogen didn't like the entire situation. There was something off about the whole thing, but she didn't want to voice her concerns to Gabe. As much as she didn't want to admit to jealousy, doubts were creeping in. It was better to step away, stop putting off her plans, and then focus on the future when she returned. Maybe by then, Anita would be gone, and that problem would sort itself out. So soon? Gabe was shocked. That wasn't nearly enough notice for work, and with Lopez still here, he was stuck in place. Imogen stood up, getting ready to leave. Having Anita sitting like a hulking shadow in the room, but not participating in conversation, made her feel more self-conscious the longer it went on. I'd like to get it over with, honestly. I know I just started helping you out, but once I get everything in New Jersey sorted, I can help a lot more. She loved her hometown. There was something magical about beachside living on the East Coast, but she was excited to start her new life. And, well, if she were being completely honest with herself, the whole situation with Anita was awkward. She still didn't know why she'd shown up out of nowhere, what her relationship was with Gabe, or when she was leaving. It was a huge elephant in the room that she wasn't allowed to ask about because Gabe was locked tighter than a penguin's butt. She wanted answers, but didn't want to make things harder for him. I don't want you to leave. He stood up to kiss her gently and lingered, both enjoying being wrapped in each other's warmth. I'll miss you, he whispered against her lips. Gabe might be close-mouthed when it came to his friend's secrets, but she loved how open he was with his feelings. She knew he only said what he meant, and that was the reason she trusted him enough to handle the situation with Anita without her interference. Imogen reached up to touch his face, her thumb caressing his bottom lip. I'll miss you too, but I'll be back as soon as I can. Gabe smiled sadly. He didn't like the idea of her being so far away. I'll be here waiting. He followed her out to her car, holding her hand and not wanting to break contact. He didn't like the distance that had been between them and wanted to make up for lost time. Now she was leaving the state and he couldn't follow her. It was frustrating. Imogen opened the car door and sat in the driver's seat. Wrapping the seatbelt around her, she hesitated. "Just be careful, please. I'm not sure what is going on with Anita." She raised a hand to stop his interruption. She had to get this out. "I know you can't or won't tell me, and I respect that, but I have a bad feeling about this situation. Watch your back, Gabe, and really think to yourself why she came to you of all people." Gabe frowned. He'd just assumed it was because he lived slightly off-grid and wouldn't be easily connected to her, but he couldn't say that aloud and give away information. Then he thought about it from her perspective. Leaning down, one hand on the door, he leaned over Imogen. "I'm not interested in Lopez." Imogen smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I know, but that doesn't mean she isn't interested in you. Just be careful." Driving away and leaving him with his strange, silent guest was the hardest thing she'd had to do. It took all of Imogen's self-control not to turn around and beg him to come with her. She'd only be gone a few days.